We're going to be starting our conversation in just a moment. I just wanted to welcome you to the B-side of Benson Theater and give you a little information about what we do here. My name is Shelby Otis. I'm the program director here. And we are using this space to raise funds to restore the historic Benson Theater 2 doors down. So all of the programming that will eventually take place in the theater is starting here. So by coming to events, you are supporting the revitalization of the Benson Theater. So thank you very much for coming. On your tables, you'll find an upcoming events flyer. Feel free to take this with you. This gives you some information about events coming up. We have an art opening next Friday for BFF, Benson First Friday. If you haven't been, check it out. The whole neighborhood is turned into a large art walk. We also have a very exciting play through the St. Bridget Theater. If you're familiar with that, it's called Incident at Vici. So that's running April 11th and also the weekend of April 19th. It's going to be a very, very deep and powerful play. And finally, we're starting a new series called Sounds of Comfort. That was funded through a grant through PayPal. And the whole purpose of this series is to create what we're calling comfort kits. So in lieu of a door cost, you can bring an item of comfort. So imagine somebody who has experienced trauma, something that they would like or something that would make them feel better can be your door charge. So items have to be new, but it could be anything from a candle to slippers, pair of socks, CD, anything that you think would bring somebody comfort. We're going to compile all of those items into bags and have them at our different locations through our community partners so that when someone experiences trauma, they can pick up a comfort kit for their friend or loved one and give it to them free of charge. So Egypt, she's a local musician. She is our musician in residence for this series, and she'll be inviting other musicians to join her. She'll also be providing free comfort vegan food at these events. Okay, so the second one will be on April 18th. And again, the door cost is either $5 or an item of comfort. So look out for those, and thank you for Aksarben and Creative and Cara for coming out tonight, and enjoy the conversation.
All right, so thank you again. I mean, you guys, you were just thanked for being here, so it's a little redundant, but I'm Tom Noblog, in case you don't know. This is one of our installments in the Riverside Chat series. So in case you don't know what that is, the idea is we are trying to show that there are all kinds of interesting people doing fascinating things in Nebraska, because Nebraska is full of people doing interesting things, but they're all convinced that nothing interesting happens here. And so we're trying to prove them wrong. Through this series, we've had a whole backlog of people we've talked to. That's all available on your favorite podcast app. So if you're interested in any of that, please look it up. As for tonight, though, we have an incredibly special guest, Cara Eastman. So let's just have her come on out. So I told Ben I wasn't going to make an awkward comment about the microphone today, because every time I make some joke like, oh yeah, do whatever you want with the microphone, but I'm going to do it anyway because, I don't know, it breaks the tension or something. So thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me. Thank you to all of you for being here. It's so early in the election cycle, but you know, Congress is every 2 years, so we got to get our butts in gear.
Yes, and so it seems like you are one of the people, so you obviously just by even having a crowd here tonight, your message has resonated, and you're somebody who, you know, we have kind of this low bar for politicians where it's like, they don't have to seem like that much of a real human being for someone to accept them, but if they do seem like a human being, then all these people have all kinds of a response to it, especially obviously if the message resonates. And you're somebody who never really left the discussion once you sort of entered the arena here. And so I'm really excited to get the chance to not just talk about what's going on right now, but a little bit of the arc of how you got to the point where you are now. So first off, I mean, are you from Nebraska originally?
I'm originally from Chicago. We chose to move to Omaha about 13 years ago. My husband is in the history department at Creighton, and so we moved here for his job. And right as we moved here, the nonprofit Omaha Healthy Kids Alliance was just getting started, and so they hired me to start it. So we brought our daughter here when she was about 5 and have raised her here in Omaha.
And so, for some reason I was convinced you lived in Lincoln for almost, I think the entire time you were running, I was like, oh no, she lives in Lincoln, because even Ben and I were talking, like, oh, we should invite her on the show, and like, she's not going to want to drive all the way down here.
I live in Dundee.
How I missed that. Well, when you were growing up, were you interested in politics? Was it like a political home to start with, or did it awaken at some point?
No, not at all. Growing up, it was just me and my mom. I don't remember ever hearing about politics. I don't remember it ever, like anything political being on the TV. We talked a lot about our own situation, our family, and my mom talked a lot about her family growing up, because she grew up in a big family, and so because it was just the two of us, it was a little bit weird for her. But no, I did not grow up in politics. I did not even grow up in a place where, it's funny because while I grew up alone with my mom, I did have a dad, and somebody recently commented on social media, they're like, oh, if you have a single mom, you can't have a dad. Well, yeah, I had a dad. He just wasn't around that much. But I remember telling him that I wanted to help people, that was what was my career was going to be, and he said, why? We didn't teach you that. You should go to Hollywood and be an actress. That's really weird too. So no, I took it upon myself when I was 10. I told my mom that I wanted to go into helping people. When I was 15, I told my best friend that I was going to buy a van and drive around and give homeless people stuff, and she told me that was stupid because I'd never make any money. And I've been doing social work my whole career, and eventually made a pretty decent living at it. And so it's getting into politics was definitely not the path that I thought I would take. It's actually my husband who was part of the impetus for me to get into it, because he lives and breathes politics as a historian. He knows a lot about it, and so I rely heavily on him for input and information. But now I would say I pretty much live and breathe politics.
Well, where do you think that impulse came from, to just always want to give and help people? Was there a moment or something where you had some epiphany about it?
Well, I think, my mom and I were relatively poor, and I don't know that I knew that at the time, but so my mom struggled a lot. We lived in places where people struggled. I grew up, with her family. They also grew up in poverty, and so for me, it was always about finding ways to level the playing field and make sure that I was always kind of disturbed by this idea of all these people having money while people, don't necessarily struggle. And so I think it was just something that was ingrained from me, probably through my family, but without them actually knowing it.
And so, did you do acting as well? Is that why your dad wanted you to go to Hollywood?
I did a little bit of acting. I was in our dance company. I think that was just in his mind, like it was going to be his meal ticket, perhaps.
Well, and so, like when you're growing up, you had the idea you're going to go give people, homeless people things. And so, at some point, though, it's like when you're in high school, were you thinking about specific jobs or careers? And was there a point where you're like, well, what if I do go to Hollywood and make a lot of money and then give some of the money to people? Or how did you sort of navigate those ideas?
No, I never wanted to. It's funny because it was never like an objective of mine to make money. It was always an objective of mine that whatever I did at the end of the day was going to help people in some way. So my thought in high school was I was going to go in, to psychology or sociology. I studied sociology in college. I was just having a conversation with a fellow social worker that a social worker came to our college once and was talking about her work and the way that she framed it around that you could have a direct impact on people's lives, meeting them where they were, depending on their situation, that it wasn't about looking at a group of people, but rather individuals and learning from their life experiences and being able to help them with those needs immediately, then and there. That was something that really appealed to me, and so that is why I went into social work, and that's really what I've been doing for my entire career, was finding ways to meet people where they're at. And I think that that's such an important thing for us to be thinking about right now, is when you look at the way that policies are designed, we're not always thinking about people where they're at. We're thinking about where we think they should be, or some sort of idealized notion, or in the case of the current administration, we're not really thinking about people at all, but rather corporations. And so to me, I think we need more social workers in office because of our training and our background and really understanding the way that communities come together, the way that people come together, and the needs of individuals based on their traditions, based on their cultures, based on their languages, their backgrounds, and how important it is to understand where people are coming from and to be a much better listener than talker.
To develop that kind of cohesive worldview, though, I mean, so like when you're in college, you take that sociology class, was that like a mind-blowing experience to you to some extent? Or were you already sort of forming these ideas?
I had so many classes. So I went to college outside of Los Angeles, and I had so many classes. I took classes from people who led the Chicano studies Chicano awareness movement in LA. I took classes from women who were leaders in the African American poetry movement. Like, I had these like incredible experiences in college where I was given this information, and it was always tied to activism that had occurred in that community. And so that was really exciting to me, and something that eventually, once I started working in social work, I always thought about those experiences that people had taught me about, that what they had learned, and how to make yourself, make your positions and your feelings known, but while also being a little bit behind the scenes. And that's really, and actually I found that to be a bit of a problem in the last, campaign, was like getting the word out about who I was and the work that I'd been doing in the community. So much of it was behind the scenes at Omaha Healthy Kids Alliance. We've been working in housing in North and South Omaha for 13 years, but people didn't necessarily know it because I wasn't putting pictures of myself on these houses. Or I wasn't the one, or I wasn't the one necessarily doing the work. My team was, and so I was always lifting them up and making sure people understood that they were the ones to get the credit for this work, and that really it's these communities that should get the credit, because that's how we empower people. So, yeah.
So you had direct experience with how activism can change things and how people can change things, and so I'm sure that there were some seeds in there, and so it's like you're starting to think, okay, here's maybe what I can do. And so you start, was the Healthy Kids Alliance, what's the story of that? How did that all come about?
Well, so Omaha Healthy Kids had been formed prior to my moving to Omaha. They grew out of the Superfund site here. So Omaha is still the largest residential Superfund site in the nation because of lead contamination. And the group was formed to create and develop a comprehensive response to lead poisoning. So we knew that there was lead in our environment as a result of the lead refinery that used to be down by the river, but also at the same time, we have 84,000 homes built before 1978, the year lead-based paint was banned. We have at that time, way too many kids that were getting exposed to enough levels of lead that it was impacting them. And we see this, actually there's a researcher at Creighton now that's doing some study on the impact that that's had on kids who grew up in East Omaha, and it's pretty significant. So we also have 17,000 lead service lines, the line from the street that carry water into our home. So lead poisoning is a huge issue in our community. It is in a lot of urban areas. And so the idea was solve that problem. Not so necessarily so easy to solve, although I would argue that it's the reason that we haven't solved it, because it is absolutely, lead poisoning is 100% preventable, and the reason that we haven't solved it is we haven't had the political will to do it. We have the money, we have the resources, we know the solutions, but we don't have policymakers that are willing to invest. And we saw that in Flint, right? Yeah. And so we need policymakers who understand that this issue is so important that if we actually take lead out of the environment, we address a number of other issues inside homes, we make them more energy efficient, we lower utility bills, we increase the tax base for communities, and we create healthier communities. And I think most importantly, we have kids who aren't poisoned from being babies and then told grow up and then graduate. It also impacts crime later in life. So there's all of these things that have this ripple effect because of lead contamination, and we need policymakers who are willing to honestly put their jobs on the line to go out and fight for this, because it's not the sexiest thing to run on. It's not the sexiest topic, but it needs to be addressed.
Isn't it ridiculous though that like not poisoning kids is not a sexy enough topic to run on? I mean,
I just put out on Twitter today that I'm having a hard time watching the GOP become the anti-children party. And that's what seems to be happening. We're talking about taking away health care. We're talking about defunding the Special Olympics. I mean, what is happening? We've had governors in the state who've been anti-kids for a long time, but now we're seeing it play out on a national level. I don't understand it.
Well, but you are the kind of person who seems like when you see a problem, you try to know enough about that problem to understand even theoretically what could fix it. So, like, how do you get to the point where you can see a problem, and then how do you even learn what you need to do to fix it or what somebody needs to do to fix it? Because a lot of people, I think, when they see some big problem, they think, oh, that's terrible, that shouldn't be the case, but then they don't know what to do beyond that. So how did you get to the point where you're the sort of person who does something about it or even knows what to do?
Well, I think that's part of how I'm hardwired. It's also part of my training as a social worker. And I also think that that's one of the reasons why I am excited to continue running for this position. There are very simple solutions in front of us to some of the complex problems that we have in our country. And I'm somebody that likes data, and so I want to see the data. I want to see the cost savings from that. And so many of the policy positions that I have taken and continue to take save the federal government money. So I have always been looking for fiscally responsible solutions to our community's biggest problems, and I believe we need to be doing that on a federal level too, because we're drowning in debt and we're going to pass that off to our kids. So we need to have solutions that actually save money. And when you look at some of the things that are being talked about on a national level right now, we know that having people have a livable wage actually ultimately saves the federal government money. We know that some kind of Medicare for All universal health care program actually saves the federal government money. And we have to start dispelling these notions that, oh, it's government control or it's too much money. We're already spending too much money. We have to have solutions that save the federal government money and are actually morally responsible, where we're protecting the United States, people who live in the United States, because that should be the first role of government, is to take care of us on some level.
That seems like a message that certainly people in Nebraska, if you are sort of like geared more conservative, it comes up all the time, fiscally responsible. It's like there's this idea that Democrats are never fiscally responsible, right? And so, are you seeing a push? Is that something that you just personally are going for? Is it a general push to try to actually emphasize the fiscal elements of a lot of the policies? Because it's not necessarily, I think, that they all were so irresponsible before, but maybe that wasn't the emphasis, and maybe that's changing. What do you think?
Well, I think that's the way it's being positioned by Republicans right now, is that Democrats want big government and big this and all, and they keep using the S word, right? Socialism. And the reality is, we have a lot of social programs right now. Public education, we have roads, we have fire departments, and a lot of those work really well. And so we need to take the models of what work, and we need to fix inefficiencies where they exist, knowing that it's not just that there are government solutions to everything, but there are efficient, effective government solutions to things. And that's something that I've been fighting for in my 13 years in Nebraska.
How did you start to develop a political philosophy of what the government should or shouldn't do?
Most of it comes from seeing people in their communities and knowing what works and what doesn't. So at Omaha Healthy Kids, we worked very closely with the EPA around the Superfund program, and I can tell you what the EPA has done really well and where they have completely failed. And so I'm not somebody that just thinks that all government programs are perfect. I've actually have been pushing on the EPA to do things better for a long time here. And so I think it's just a matter of experience and seeing what works and what doesn't, and going out and talking to people and seeing, again, we were just having this conversation about how much somebody's paying in healthcare when you're paying $600 a month and you have a $5,000 deductible and your copays. All these things add up. And if we look at the average family paying $10,000 a year for healthcare, but there's a more effective, affordable solution, affordable for the government, why wouldn't we explore that?
So, I mean, would you say to some extent it's using what you learned from your social work then and just applying those same ideas as far as like, you can't, obviously in social work you have to think about the money, you have to think about where it's coming from, how you're spending it. So does a lot of that apply to policy or things the government could be doing?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, coming from running nonprofits, I mean, we have to be very good stewards of our donations. We have to be very fiscally responsible, and we have to know where to invest and where we have to find outside resources. And at Omaha Healthy Kids, we always required some sort of skin in the game from our clients because we knew that was the best way to achieve our goals. That if they were bought in financially in some way, that was either through sweat equity or through some sort of financial contribution, especially on the landlord side, they were getting so much more out of it and that they were more invested. And I think that's the same way that our government programs should work. But they shouldn't. It shouldn't be that you go bankrupt because you have some sort of health issue. Or right now what I'm seeing is, I have friends who are paying over $1,000 because their tires have gone out so much driving around this crazy streets that we have right now. How many people have that much money laying around that they can just afford to pay these things? Like, we have to find ways to make sure that we are not having people who are normally pretty financially solvent, but one incident happens, one financial disaster, one medical emergency, and then suddenly they're living in poverty. That affects all of us.
And so, I mean, you're able to apply that. What was the moment when you first thought, maybe I know enough to at least do better than some of the people currently in office? Because surely that's part of the equation.
That's such a good question. Honestly, I mean, I have to credit the United States president for this one. People would ask me prior to my decision to run for Congress, have you ever thought of running for higher office? And I'd say, I don't think people like me get elected. Like, I've been standing up for people living in poverty, people of color, really working on racial, social, environmental justice my whole career. I speak my mind. I don't have a background in public policy like my husband. I don't watch MSNBC all the time. Like, it wasn't, who I was. And then, in 2016, Donald Trump gets elected. It's like, well, hey, I guess anybody can be in public office.
Well, what you said there is, I think kind of sad, because you're like, well, I don't think people like me get elected. I only spend my life helping people, trying to make things better for poor people. Like, that doesn't work. That doesn't go well. So, I mean, what was it that made you think, okay, so like the federal level versus the state level, was it just the timing worked out that way, or?
No, it's really about passion. And for me, the things that if I'm gonna put myself and my family and my friends through this insanity of running for federal office, I have to do it with something that I'm passionate about. And I would like to spend the next decade working on healthcare, and that to me is my priority, and will continue to be.
Question clapping my mic makes a terrible noise. So was there a day, a specific moment when you realized, like, okay, I got to pull the trigger on this. This is what I want to do. I'm committed to it. To running.
This next cycle or the first cycle?
The first cycle. Yeah. We'll get to the next cycle.
There were a couple of small events, of conversations I had with people, watching Obama's speech at the Democratic Convention in 2016. Oh, we miss him so. Having conversations with Crystal Rhodes from the Douglas County Democrats, or honestly, a conversation that I had with Brad Ashford where he told me he wasn't going to be running again. So it was
Can you tell that story?
Yeah, I mean, he was one of the first people that I talked to, and said, I considered that seat to have been his. I didn't actually know that he had lost until the morning after the election, because I was, still drowning in tears and trying to cheer my daughter up a little bit. And somebody had texted me and said, you should think about running for Congress. And I was like, Congress? But, oh God, Brad Ashford lost too. I couldn't believe it. So I met with him a couple months later, and we had coffee, and he told me he probably wasn't going to run, that he'd always really liked me, and that he could help me. And then obviously he changed his mind, which he has the right to do. But yeah, I think it was just a number of conversations like that, going out and talking to people, friends of mine, elected officials, former elected officials, Ben Gray, Brenda Council, Mike Boyle, Ann Boyle, just people that I trusted, and eventually it just made sense.
So, like, when you meet with Ashford, though, is it sort of like you're trying to just get permission from him to run at a certain level?
I don't know that it was permission. I think it was input. Like, you know, what would this look like? One, I wanted to find out if he was running, and so that was honestly the reason that I wanted to meet with him. But once he said he wasn't, then it was just kind of fun to chat, and he was showing me texts from Nancy Pelosi, and I thought that was cool.
Well, and so obviously then that turned into something a little bit different.
Right.
Were there any key takeaways sort of that you gained from the experience of the primary then? What was that like?
Well, honestly, I mean, I think, I think primaries are great. I mean, I think it's such a great way to give voters an option, especially in Nebraska. I mean, we've had a hard time recruiting people to run for Congress for the last for the last decade. I mean, it's been challenging. We still have, key positions in the Nebraska government that have gone uncontested, and we need more people to be running. So I welcome the primary. I thought it was great for me. It obviously gave me a ton of momentum going into the general election, and I think that's true this time too. And I think we need to really think about how we as Democrats interact in a primary situation. It makes it uncomfortable, I think, sometimes for people, but I think it's a really healthy process, and it's a great way to get ideas out there and to give voters a choice.
Right, well, so the choice then becomes, you had to sort of position yourself to be notably different from Ashford, right? And so what were the key differences that you thought, okay, here I can bring something different to the table?
Well, I think part of it was just, I mean, we come from different backgrounds. I mean, his background, he'd spent a lot, he's a lawyer, he'd spent a lot of time, legislating. Like I believe that is his passion. And I just have a different background. Mm-hmm. We do have differences of opinion, we did, about policy solutions. And so I think we did a good job of laying those out for people and allowing them to make a decision.
Do you see yourself as part of like a different wing of the Democratic Party then, or potential democratically elected representatives, as opposed to someone like Ashford, who maybe has more of an older, not necessarily like an old-fashioned style, but this is like maybe the tide is a little bit different, or there's just different sorts of movements within the Democratic Party? Would you identify yourself as someone who is part of like a newer one? Because like you hear progressive thrown around as different from liberal, and I don't know that the distinction is entirely clear to me. Do you care to comment on where you fall in any of the spectrums there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that for me personally, I see this like tiny spectrum of Democrats and where we fall right now, but I think the values are pretty much the same. That we care about people, we care about putting people above moneyed interests and above corporations, and care about making sure that there's a level playing field, knowing that what's happening right now on the Republican side is they are putting the very, very wealthy over everybody else, and so that top 1% has all the benefits, and the rest of us just continue to get screwed. And so to me, that's where, like from a value system, I think that's where we fall as Democrats. Now, I mean, when it's a challenging situation to be in, where you're kind of pitted against each other as Democrats, if you're a corporate Democrat, a progressive Democrat, a liberal Democrat, I mean, all these kinds of things. But like, I mean, for me, it's really just about speaking up for people and coming from a value position that I stand for. It's why I don't take corporate PAC money. I do not believe that corporations need politicians to be in their pockets. I mean, it's time to change that paradigm. And
that's worth an applause right there.
Well, and we have to think about why we do that. I mean, it's in some ways it's like, oh, it's how things have just been done. Well, I think what's amazing right now is you've got a new crop, maybe, of Democrats that are looking at these issues and saying, just because we've always done things this way doesn't mean it's working for everybody, doesn't mean it's the right thing to do. And so I was really proud to take that stance. That was a relatively new approach, right? Not taking corporate PAC money. Now it seems kind of old and boring, and I got to think of something new. But
that's boring. We're in trouble.
But I mean, but it's interesting because we, as candidates, like we put it out there and say it, but think about what that really means, because it has been the tradition that you take corporate money. And then when we look at how much the fossil fuel industry spends on supporting candidates, and then you're like, oh, it's shocking that candidates are saying, oh, we can't really significantly, influence and impact climate change right now. It's like, well, yeah, because you're, the oil industry is supporting you quite a bit. So I think that kind of stuff makes sense when we talk about, really putting people above corporations, and we think about healthcare right now. This idea that we would, dismantle or change the insurance industry, it scares people for some reason. And I think actually Senator Sanders has been amazing on this issue, where he's just said, on his perspective, yeah, just get rid of the insurance companies. Like, why are we so afraid of that idea, but we're totally okay with people just absolutely drowning in medical debt or paying outrageous costs in prescriptions? Like, why have we decided that it's okay to pay $2,500 for a pill, or however much people are paying in prescriptions? I mean, it's crazy. And so I really think we need to look at, I'm excited to see all these ideas coming out of the Democratic Party, and what's fascinating to me right now is a lot of the ideas that we were talking about in the last election and last campaign that were so radical, right? Medicare for all, a livable wage, fighting climate change. I mean, these ideas are now pretty mainstream. I mean, you have almost every Democrat that's running for president that's talking about these issues. And so I think it's great that we're, within 5 months we've been able to kind of make these ideas and, more mainstream, but also the thing about them is that they're widely supported by the vast majority of Americans. Yeah. And so the fact that we're not taking that into consideration as much seems a little crazy to me. Like, I think it's time to start listening to the people.
Well, and so you do when you run the first time, one of the problems I thought was really annoying was, there seems like there's not a good way for candidates to actually talk about policy or even ideological disagreements. Like, I remember even watching the debates with Bacon, and it's like, the structure seems very stilted to me, where it's like, it seems like it'd be better if you guys could actually just have a conversation in front of people, and you could even disagree, as opposed to, we treat it like a sport, where it's like, okay, here's your time, okay, now it's his time, now it's their time, and it's like, it's just like, I feel this is a waste of everyone's time, including the candidates at a certain point, because I'm not learning much other than, you have enough time probably just to give sound bites on both sides, and that's it. And so, I mean, do you think there's any changes that can be made about the way that these actual elections happen to try to move a conversation toward content, as opposed to sort of just like cheerleading for one side or the other, which seems like everyone gets pushed to?
Yes. I think we need publicly financed elections. I think that we need elections to last for campaigns to last for about maybe 6 weeks. Because, I mean, I will have been running for Congress for about 4 years when this is said and done. It's a long time. If you're not sick of me, I'm certainly a little sick of me some days.
We feel that way whether we're running for office or not.
And I think we need to have more debates, actual debates, not the you have a minute, go, give your sound bite, and I mean have actual healthy debates about significant issues that people care about, allow the public to participate in that, and open the airwaves so that we're having these debates so people can see them on TV, put them on social media, put them online, and stop this like year and a half of television ads and mail and all the stuff that we're just spending so much money on. I mean, the presidential primary, I mean, it's outrageous how much this is going to end up costing people, and and then as a candidate, the amount of time that you spend raising money instead of studying, talking to people, researching. I mean, that to me is where we should be spending our time, not on calling people and asking them for their hard-earned money.
Yeah. And so, I mean, as far as that election, were you ever in contact with Don Bacon outside of those sort of awkward debates? Or, I mean, was there any communication that goes on?
No.
Okay.
In the primary, we ran into each other a couple of times, and He was actually at the Blue Line, which is my coffee shop, and I told him that was my coffee shop. And but no, not too much. Yeah, I mean, I suppose there would be that possibility. I don't know.
Do you think that would make a difference to some extent in the way some of these campaigns are run if people actually knew each other as humans a little bit as opposed to just, I mean, I'm not saying that's even exclusive to this, but it seems like a lot of times it's just like you've got your boogeyman on one side and your boogeyman on the other side of people, the way people act. And I don't know that a lot of times candidates really do meet the person they're even up against or talk to them or even get a chance to know them.
Well, I think that the problem is not necessarily the candidates. And if you watched the last election, Bacon and I think we're pretty civil to each other. And that's just partly who I am as a person. Maybe it's who he is too. But the issue comes from outside groups. And so, you know, it was easy for him to absolve himself from the outside attacks on me because he could just say, well, it's other groups that are doing that. And I think that that's a big problem in politics right now too, is, you know, you had about $1.2 million that the Republicans spent attacking me. And which, if you think about it, it's amazing that I did as well as I did because the Democrats spent about $37,000 attacking him. So there's a huge discrepancy in the amount of money that went into that. On some level, we were happy about that, but unfortunately, it moves election points a little bit. But that's the problem. Like, we've come to accept this in American politics as just status quo, and it needs to change. It's a stupid waste of money. Like, we need to be able to just give people the right information, let people get to know candidates, and make their decision.
Well, yeah, that's something like this. Something like this is almost existing because I don't see that happen in a lot of the elections where you actually can get a conversation with the candidates running. It's all just sound bites and what seems to test well. It seems like the only thing that a lot of people have access to. And so, incidentally, I did invite Don Bacon on the show too. I haven't heard back, so I don't know. It was a few months ago. I don't know. But so, as far as we get to this election. So, I mean, you're trying to come up with something where it's like, you're already at a disadvantage running as a Democrat in Nebraska, it seems like. Would you agree with that to start with? Is it, I mean, because like I can make jokes about it, but you know more than I do.
I don't know. I mean, look at the last election. We picked up a few seats in the state legislature. We control most of the local boards, county boards, city council. There's some amazing stuff happening in the Democratic Party here in Nebraska right now, or at least in Douglas County.
Well, is the infrastructure just smaller though? I mean, assuming than like what the Republican Party is in Nebraska.
Oh yeah, absolutely, and that's one of the reasons why we announced early. And actually, we have been focused on fundraising this last couple of months because we want to show that in Nebraska, Democrats can raise money the same way that Republicans can. And we know that Bacon's already starting to raise money, so we want to show that we know how to do that too. I had over 90,000 donors to my campaign last time. It's a remarkable number of people that were invested in this race and invested in me as a candidate, and I'm so proud of that. And now I'm going back to each and every one of you asking for more.
I mean, do you think this, I mean, Nebraska is thought of as a red state, so whether we're saying you're at a disadvantage or not, I don't know, but like, is it that people, I mean, do you get the sense that people actually do much in terms of like educating themselves about candidates a lot of the times in positions? Or I mean, like, I feel like a lot of the time people are just set in their ways where it's like, maybe my family voted this way, I vote this way, and it seems like now you want to move the needle in either direction where it's like you actually should look at who's running regardless of how your family voted. So I'm not saying necessarily like how can we switch it to a blue state so much as like how do you change the way people look at elections to make it so it's actually about what the candidate believes and thinks as opposed to just sort of blind party loyalty, which I think everyone can agree that's probably not the best system.
I think that's a great question, and actually one that I'd love to hear from an audience of invested people in, because I don't know that I have the answer. I mean, I have pieces of it, but that's one of the things that we're looking to do this cycle is, and I said this in the World Herald, that I felt like running the first time gave me an opportunity to introduce myself to the district, and now I have a chance to allow people to really get to know me and what I stand for. But how do you do that is still, I don't know, to be decided, I guess.
Well, we can open up. Do you guys have any ideas? You want to throw anything out for us? Yeah, sure.
Well, I think the person who, like I told you earlier, the person who can frame the discussion about health care for everyone, affordable and so forth, who can do that is going to go a long ways towards winning any election in America. But I think the big thing that we have to do is convince the middle class and the lower class economic people in America of how a healthcare system like that is going to be good for them. And so we've got to, get into things like how is the money going to get, how is it going to get paid for? Obviously, is a big question. I think one question that needs to be answered honestly somehow is that the rich are going to have to start paying their fair share, for one thing. I don't think we can, it's not good as much as we may want to attack the rich, but just get their point across that they've got to start paying their fair share. The other part is for people who, is their health care going to get paid for in a way like we pay for Social Security and Medicare right now as a, what do you call it, a payroll deduction sort of thing. I would have to imagine it'd be something like that. But the big part is, and I was a union student for years, and the question that's always dogged me is how do we convince people to vote for candidates? How do we quit getting people to vote for candidates who do nothing but slap them in the face at every opportunity? So that's the question. I don't know. It's got to.
Do you want to speak to that at all, or just let it sit there? What do you think?
I grapple with that question every day since November 6th. I mean, it's an interesting thing where we passed Medicaid expansion, although I don't know what we're doing with it. But we passed it, but people didn't, overwhelmingly vote for the candidate that was out there talking about health care.
It's the same situation that happened in Missouri with the right to work. Missouri was a red state. They always voted for a lot of Republicans and people who were anti-labor and so forth. They went down there, they had a referendum, the whole state voted as to whether they wanted to be right to work, i.e. get rid of unions, and it was overwhelmingly defeated, 2-1, 66 to 33%. Yet, those people voted at the same time for candidates who did not back that sort of thing. So there's the disconnect.
I think I would be curious to see if you do have any answer for why you think that happens, or what you think could be done about that disconnect.
Well, I think that people are looking for authenticity and integrity in their elected officials. Maybe just on the Democratic side right now. I don't know if they're looking for integrity on the other side. As I'm saying, I'm like, I don't know about integrity. Authenticity, maybe. And so and I think some of this is new. Like some of this where you're hearing from Democrats who are eschewing, corporate money and talking about, reducing the role that corporations play when it comes to political influence, or actually creating policies that are going to address, racial injustice, or, I think that some of this takes a little bit of time. I know that to be true for Nebraska. Like there are a number of times where I would approach people and say, I want to try out this new program around, healthy, energy efficient housing, and they'd be like, it's too soon for that. Like you got to go a little bit slower. So I think that's another reason why it's important for candidates like me, where the lose margin was so tiny, to try again, because it's, let me tell you, it's easy to give up, and it would be fun. But I think the reason to do it again is to give people more of an opportunity to really get to know me and ask questions. And when we have these models of, like you were saying about Bacon's town hall, that it's just like, these standardized questions and answers. You get an hour with your, congressional rep, and he's not really telling you anything that you couldn't find out about on a website. It's like, that's not a town hall. It's just a choreographed response to things. We're seeing a paradigm shift. There are so many people that got elected in 2018 that are speaking to these issues and really changing the way that we do American politics. And so I think that's really exciting to watch. But, maybe we just need a little bit more time here.
Why the House and not the Senate?
For me?
For you? Congress is where I feel like
I can really make an impact, and also that I think that there's learning to be achieved that way. Of course, when you're running for federal office, you think about different levels. I don't know that I have the answer to how do we engage the whole of Nebraska in these issues where, you just have such overwhelming support for Donald Trump in some of the more rural areas of Nebraska. And I think that is going to take some more time to really figure out what the solution is and who the right candidate is for that. I do not believe that many of the things that I want to work on and the policy positions that I have resonate well enough with the whole of Nebraska right now, but I think they will over time. I think it's just going to take a little bit more time. But what we saw in the fact that I won Douglas County, and that what we can do here is start engaging more Democrats and start turning out more Democrats to vote. And I think that that's a really key piece. I think that there are wins to be gained from independents and from Republicans who are tired of what's happening. But I think what we really need to start doing is engaging Democrats like they've never been engaged before, and going out to talk to people who live in communities where candidates don't usually go. And start having conversations with people living in poverty, and start having conversations with people who are so disenfranchised and feel like, what does it matter who represents me? I feel like that right now, right? Like, I don't feel represented by my congressional representative at all. He's 97% with Donald Trump. That's not representing me in a purple district. And there's no compromise. It's all speaking points, but then you just vote with the Republican Party every single time. I'm tired of it, and I think people are too. But it's we have to have a comprehensive strategy, and we have to all work together. And I'm excited to be a part of that, and to really find ways to engage people and try things that we've never tried before.
So I don't know how much you engage with the word socialism in anything that you do, but I'm curious, because it seems like, certainly on the Republican side, there is no impulse whatsoever to try to explain what exactly socialism is in terms of policy in the United States, or what it has been since, I don't know, public school would probably be like an example, right? Going all the way back to that, Thomas Jefferson. So how do you engage with that, especially as a social worker who probably knows a lot more of like social policies that might veer toward the philosophy of socialism that we've had, that everyone hasn't died from, the whole country seems to exist still. How much do you try to educate about that, or engage with that, or just sort of like, do you try to re-embrace that word at all? Do you just sort of like say, well, here's maybe a different way of looking at some of these policies, or where are you with that whole debate?
Well, right now where I am is that when we look at the current leadership in the United States of America and the way that he does things, I call that fascism.
Yeah.
And that scares me a lot more than having public education. And so I think that this is where, as Democrats, we need to really start standing up for ourselves and showing that having a government-funded, privately delivered healthcare system is not socialism. It's actually just the right thing to do.
I think this is a good point then to open up to general questions from the audience. Do you have any questions for Cara? Yes.
So, as a future medical professional, I'm all for making medical costs lower for the patient, but I personally am facing down $450,000 in debt. Right? What should we do about student debt? Because I'm scared.
Yeah, as you should be. And it's funny because we assume that as a medical professional, you'll just be making that back in a year or two, and that's not the reality, right? And so first and foremost, I think it's really important to talk about when you look at the way that the Medicare for All, the Medicare for All that I believe in is structured. Medical professionals actually don't lose out much in salary, but I think student debt is a huge issue in this country. And I saw that over and over again in my term on the board of Metropolitan Community College, that even students leaving Metro were drowning in debt, or often that pay was a factor for them not being able to even attend Metro, which is the cheapest game in town. And so that is something that we absolutely need to address. There are a lot of creative, interesting solutions from, free community college. I like to talk about debt-free because, again, I do believe you have to have like a little bit of skin in the game, so free is not my favorite word. But, making sure that students aren't leaving college drowning in debt, having some, I think Kirsten Gillibrand's idea of, having, some sort of trade-off of like public service for education, I think that's an amazing idea. There are proponents of student debt cancellation that are putting out some really interesting research and facts about the boon to our economy that would create. So I think that this is such a crisis. The amount of student debt, over 1.5 trillion in the country. I mean, this is inhibiting our ability to be competitive in a global marketplace. It's making it so that people don't necessarily want to choose careers where they're going to actually be able to make a difference and help people, because you'd probably be able to make a lot more money, even though we think doctors make so much, and maybe bartending even. So, I mean, I think this is something that needs to be addressed, and we need to get on it quickly because it's an emergency.
Any other questions from the audience? Feel free to just raise your hand or shout something out. I don't care. Well, someone already had it. Since you already spoke a lot, so we'll give it a precedence here. Yeah.
So, where are you on the recent versions of like the Green New Deal resolutions?
So I am one of those rare people that read most of the Green New Deal, so know what's in it. To me, tying economic development and climate change is brilliant, and makes so much sense for the way that we can actually move the needle, knowing that we are in a state of emergency when it comes to climate change and that the impacts are about to be irreversible. And as somebody who hopes to have a grandchild, maybe 10, 20 years from now, I think we need to be thinking about these things. But one of the things that I had been working on at Omaha Healthy Kids was, looking at how we create energy efficient housing, how that impacts climate change, and also lowers utility bills while creating a huge workforce that would locally be producing healthy homes. And so I think that that's, to me, is the most exciting part of the Green New Deal. I would like to see us be a little bit more laser focused when it comes to those ties between economic development and climate change. I think there are pieces of it that are very pie in the sky, although we should be working towards. But I absolutely support a Green New Deal. I think that the unfortunate vilification that the Republicans have perpetrated against it, simply because they're afraid of its main sponsor, is kind of sad and pathetic. And but I think that it's exciting to hear Democrats talking about this. I mean, we are now the party of ideas, and I love that. I love that we're finally kind of getting back to our roots and really putting out bold policy positions that will impact things for, in a positive way. And I'm proud to be part of that.
I'll say, I think the fact that the environment has become a partisan issue, that's just, I don't even know what to make of it. I mean, I understand why it happened, but it's just absurd. I mean, would you say that, going back to your reaction to the Superfund site, is the environment and the way that impacts both people and just wildlife, has that been a particular passion for you in terms of sort of directions you might want to go?
Yeah, absolutely. And so what we saw with the Superfund site is that you have this layering effect of environmental intoxication and poisoning of kids over and over and over again. So starting with lead poisoning, going down to industrial emissions, even just the way that communities are designed and where they're placed, and the building of the 75 freeway, and all these things that have had these long-term impacts on kids in these neighborhoods. And we have to actually be designing communities now thinking about these things, because what has happened in the environmental justice movement has not gone far enough by any means. And so, and the people that are impacted are people living in poverty and people of color. And the reality has been that our policymakers just aren't putting them first.
Okay, another question you had when I cut you off, and then I asked another one before I went back to you, so I'm sorry about that. What was your
No,
question?
it's okay. I was just going to comment on like what you said about, or what the bartender said about the $450,000, debt and so forth.
You want my mic since
No,
you
no,
didn't have to talk?
No, I just want to look at her.
Okay, sorry.
But you said, and talk about skin in the game, if I'm not mistaken, like in a lot of European countries, at least it used to be, if you qualified for med school, the government paid for the vast majority of it. But by the same token, the doctors and dentists and all those people did an awful lot of work where they go out. I lived over there for a while in different countries, and they would go to like the schools in the little villages, and all the kids would get a dental exam, and they all get physicals and things like that. And that was all paid for by the government, and that's what socialism is. But when they come back with this socialism thing, I think it's a good idea for you to say, if you think good roads are this, and if you think this kind of thing is this, and if you like having this where your mom can stay in a health care facility or whatever when she's 90 years old, that's, if that's socialism, then so call me that. But don't go around saying it real loud.
Did you have a follow-up to that? I saw your hand go up for a second.
Just education-wise, also a lot of the time in European countries, if you're having your education paid for, you can only take a class once. So it's like you're not going to be wasting money.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on any of that you want to share with everybody? Or?
Well, I'm just saying also, like, I hate to go on about European style, but that's why don't we learn from what has worked for those countries? When I watch debates about healthcare on TV, I say, why don't they ask somebody how they do it in Sweden or Denmark or the Netherlands or something like that?
It's always fascinating to me when that does come up, because there's always like the one person who went to Sweden once, broke their knee, and then had to wait in line.
Yeah.
And it makes me laugh, because before my mother passed away, we were waiting 3, 4, 5 months for her doctor's appointments, and that was to deal with cancer, things that were like, emergencies. And so I'm like, people wait in line here. I mean, it's not the craziest thing, but the way that it gets exaggerated and the way it gets talked about, and I mean, the reality is, when we lived in Spain for a year when our daughter was born, and she got sick one day. We went to the emergency room. They gave her some medicine. We took her home. It didn't cost us a dime, and it's like, kind of, we didn't wait. The doctor wasn't scary. She got great health care. I mean, there are other countries that do this really well.
Any other questions from the audience here? Yeah.
It's estimated that at least $10 billion goes to subsidizing oil companies in this country. Some estimates are as high as $52 billion. I'm just gobsmacked by this, seeing how they turn around, they invest in our representatives. This money doesn't go back to help mitigate the effects of climate change that they're causing. And I was just wondering, would you sponsor some kind of accountability with the oil companies, whether we're talking about the Koch brothers denying climate change and actively campaigning against the science, to maybe helping out with people that are suffering from like flood victims or drought?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think that stepping back a little bit, my first thing is let's get money out of politics.
Okay.
Because that's the first thing that strikes me. I mean, that is the most, to me, that is, if I had a magic wand and would win a seat in Congress and could do one thing, that would be it. Because that would change everything. And that's where we see the roots of corruption, and where we see, politicians who get into those positions. It's funny, I was in DC the last campaign and had a meeting with an insurance company who said, one of the heads up and the C-suite people said, well, candidates often say that they're refusing corporate PAC money, but once they get in, then they don't really care about that anymore. You're going to do that, right? And so it's funny because Dave, who was just here, the guy with the hat, my finance director, was like on the edge of his seat, like, what's she gonna do? She's actually being offered corporate PAC money right now. And I said, no, that would be lying to the people in my district. Like, I told you, I'm not taking corporate PAC. He's like, I know, but that's just a thing candidates say. And I just said, no, I'm not doing that. That's not. So it's interesting, I mean, how ingrained this is in our system, and I encourage people to find out from candidates who ran on not taking corporate PAC money, make sure that once they're in, they're not taking it.
How do you get corporate money out of politics?
Well, I mean, ideally, we start with, overturning Citizens United, and the way that the Supreme Court is moving, that's a big challenge, although I still think it's something we should be aiming for. But we need more candidates to stand up and say that they're not going to do this. We need that they're not going to take corporate PAC money. We need big systems change when it comes to American politics. We need to end the way gerrymandering happens. Obviously, it's been a huge impact in our district, and so. I think that there are places you see around the country, places that are moving in this direction, but it is going to take electing policymakers who actually want to change these things.
Well, so that seems like the kind of the theme of the night is like if you want to see change, you have to vote that change into office, right? So, is there any other question before we wrap things up here? Any other comment? You can just shout compliments at Gar if you want to.
Oh, I have a question.
Oh, yeah.
I'm her husband. But I loved your question. I think it was you behind me. Your last question. There's someone. You. But I wonder. You worked on the Superfund site.
I did.
With a big corporation here in town
I did.
that helped address this serious issue. I wonder if that could be some kind of model
Yeah.
for the way oil companies and other companies address environmental disasters and climate change and things like that. Maybe you could walk us through that. This was not planned. I promise you.
Totally not
She would
planned.
like that.
So, no, I think that's a good point. I mean, what we're seeing is actually right now there are some large corporations that are taking the lead on, dealing with climate change and dealing with the way the fossil fuel industry handles things. And so one of the things that we did here was create a public-private partnership to deal with lead contamination, and that works really well. And so that's something that I have constantly been pushing for and would continue to push for is like, it's, there are ways that, so in Omaha, it was Union Pacific that was working with us, and they, people would argue about the reasons that they were doing it, but the reality was we were able to get a good chunk of money from them to be able to invest in dealing with the impacts of lead poisoning, which I would argue they didn't really have anything to do with to begin with anyway. So, but regardless, I mean, at least then people are being held responsible, for their actions or inactions, and we were able to make some pretty good change out of that. So I think that that's one way that we can do this. But I think, from a policy standpoint, we just have to have people that really understand that we have one planet we live on. We've got one shot at this. And we have to start taking care of the place we live.
That's also, yeah. It's like,
It's funny that that's controversial.
I know, you keep coming back to these things like poisoning kids, taking care of things, cleaning up after yourself. It's like, those are things you teach your kids when they're like 5, right? I don't know. Well, I guess they're probably not poisoning kids. They probably don't need to be taught that one. But so on that topic, one last question for me is, how do you keep optimistic as someone who's interested in change, promising change, hoping to give change on a wide scale when things look pretty grim sometimes?
I'll be honest, I since I made the decision, just a couple of weeks after the election to run again, my optimism has ebbed and flowed. But it's really people like you all sitting in the room, and I'm not trying to pander to you. I'm being honest. Like it's when I have the opportunity to talk to you and to see that there's still that fire in the belly to help somebody like me, or when I talk to somebody like Fatima who's sitting here and see the stuff that she's been doing in the community, but also how many of her friends and people and her family members are so significantly impacted by terrible policies at the federal level. That's really what keeps me going. And so I hope that everyone here will continue to stay involved and reach out to me whenever you want to, because it's really those one-on-one conversations that keep me going and make me realize that, I mean, this, running for Congress was never really about me. It's really about my desperation for our country and the idea that we can change things. And I think we did that. I think we moved the needle for the district. The idea that a woman running on a platform like mine, somebody who had never been involved in federal politics before, only lost by such a small number. And actually, I mean, with all due respect to my friend Jane Raybould, outperformed the moderate Democratic woman that was running for Senate in the district. That speaks volumes to what people care about. What happened is Republicans turned out in droves. And there are a number of reasons for that. I mean, I think some of it was, coming out to vote against somebody like me, but I think most of it had to do with timing and the Kavanaugh hearings and the caravan and things that play well in this district. It'll be interesting to see what's happening in our country right before the 2020 election and what gets people motivated and galvanized to vote. But I think that what we see is a strong top of the ticket, a great presidential candidate on the Democratic side, coupled with a lot more voters. I mean, we anticipate maybe 60,000, if not 100,000 more voters, that we can really turn this around. And the strategy will be a little bit different, but we will still focus on field, and we will still focus on talking to voters and talking about the things they care about and listening to them.
First off, I want to thank all of you for coming out. I want to thank Eastside for hosting the event. And of course, thank you so much, Cara, for being here.